Honestly, Brian, if I hadn't left, I don't know if I would have been alive or well. It was the darkest place of my life. I've never been there before. Rest means being deeply connected to your agency. So what does that mean? It means you can't rest if you're not at rest. So if you get a massage and you are constantly second guessing yourself, you will be tense by Monday. The first step is to pause and pause, give yourself the space to listen to yourself until you can believe what yourself is honestly trying to tell you.
Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast exploring life-changing career moves. I'm your host, Brian Akar. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the bold decisions that transform their careers and lives. Let's dive in. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. Leaving a prestigious career path isn't just about walking away from a job. It's about redefining what success looks like for you. Today's guest, Dana Weeks, took that leap from law and policy to founding Thrive Architects. Dana's journey is a blueprint for how courage, clarity, and choice can lead to real growth. She also hosts the Rest of Us podcast, where she explores rest as self-liberation for advocates and professionals who give so much of themselves. Together, we'll dig into what it means to thrive, to rest, and to reimagine the life you're building. Let's go check it out. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Dana Weeks, founder of Thrive Architects, a platform dedicated to helping professionals and leaders design lives where they can truly thrive. With a background in law and policy advocacy, Dana made the bold decision to step away from a traditional legal career to create her own practice rooted in empowerment, clarity, and growth. She's also the host of the Rest of Us podcast, which explores rest as self-liberation for those losing themselves to the demands of work and the world, which we all can relate to on this show. Dana's story weaves together courage, clarity, and the radical choice to redefine both work and rest. And I'm excited to share it with you today. So Dana, welcome to Why I Left. How you doing?
Doing well. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I always love to give a shout out how I meet guests. And there was also a guest on season 5, Farah Hussein, who connected us. And so I love just this network of networks that we continue to build through the show. And so thank you, Farah, for connecting us. And so Dana, before we kind of really get into this, I'd love for you to, especially being a former attorney myself, or I don't know if you can ever say former, but an attorney myself. There you go. I love that. A recovering attorney myself. Can you walk us through your early career in law and policy and really what drew you to that path?
Sure. Well, again, thank you for having me. I'll start by talking about when I was like 5 years old. I promise you, I'm not going to tell my whole life story, but I think that's a good place to start. When I was 5 is when I probably could start remembering. My parents are from Barbados and they're immigrants. And so we would have conversations around the dinner table about politics and policy. We have all these rich conversations. But I would notice that when we would go outside the home, my parents' demeanor would be slightly different. Either they would be silent or they would be silenced in what they said. And I would notice how voice played a role in interactions with people at such a young age. And I think that translated through most of my life, through 6th grade, where I'd be protesting and going to the superintendent's office, through college, where I did a lot of advocacy, and then post-college as well, where I did work in worked in organizing, I did work in policy, and I also did work in regulatory law. So I really got exposed to all 3 areas. And I realized that while I loved all 3 areas, if I only focused on one, I don't know if that would have worked for me. I needed something that had that combination. And so that's why I decided to go to law school, because I really wanted to hone my skills as it related to advocacy. And at the same time, I really got to explore policy and the law, and then I would bring an organizing lens to it. So I ended up at a firm, Patton Boggs, back in the day when Mr. Boggs was still alive. And that's where I was a lawyer lobbyist, where I worked on legislative issues. And I also worked on regulatory issues. So I worked first with I started often where how a bill would be passed into law? And then once there was a law, how do the agencies implement that law? So I did it from concept to completion. And so that was my early start, my career. It represented Fortune 500 companies. I represented civil rights groups. I represented research organizations. And I did that for about in institutions of higher education. And I did that for about 6 years. And then a number of us, about 11 of us, lateraled over to another firm, and we helped to rebuild their legislative and public policy practice. And so that is where I stayed for another 6.5 to 7 years, or spent a good chunk of my career doing that kind of work, both legislative and also regulatory work.
That's amazing. And what were some of those like formative experiences from your legal and advocacy work that shaped how you see not only leadership, but also purpose?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think some of the formative ones was first, I really got to be exposed from the very start of my legal career with complex problems that required problem solving, not just kind of a gloss over or a fix. So being exposed early to issues of first impression, being exposed early to, we have the legal side of this, but we haven't thought about the policy side, being exposed to how does this work in a political environment where it's not just about the issue, it's about reputation, it's about people, really helped me to see that problem solving is very much a nuanced way of putting puzzle pieces together to kind of get to the big picture. And I realized for me that I loved being a strategist in these areas, especially, unfortunately, when there was a crisis. I actually loved being at the center of problem solving, or working in the center of problem solving, to doing that. So that was one thing that was formative. The other thing that was formative is that I had a mentor by the name of Nicole Nice, who was a senior associate when I was a first year associate. And she taught me the art of professionalism at another level that I just was not ready for. Law school does not prepare you for that. Undergraduate school does not prepare you for that. Her ability to not only advise really well to get to the best interest of a matter, but also her ability to provide the utmost client service. How do you build trust with people? How do you service people in a way where they want to stay at the table with you and problem solve together? How do you garner the respect so that you're trusted to do the work and do it correctly? Nicole taught me so much of that early on in my career, and I was truly grateful for that. And then the last thing that I would say is formative is that I actually had an excellent client service team. We were people who cared about each other, our well-being. We cared about how each other grew in our careers. There was a strong investment in seeing someone grow in particular projects, not just long term. And there were about 6 to 7 of us in this smaller group that really built what I would say is what I think a lot of people hope they get in their career. And so it was really formative to learn and test out leadership, because each of us had autonomy to do so. We collaborated together. We were innovative in our thinking. And I think that was a brand that really was associated with how we worked with clients, not only in the firm, but throughout DC.
And that must have been amazing to have an experience with those people moving forward together. And now what's interesting now is eventually it was time to pivot, right? And so
Yes.
what was the moment then, despite all of that? Because having those connections and that type of feeling with a group of folks that you're working with, especially now, I'd imagine is kind of rare. But what was the moment that you realized, okay, despite all of this, it's time for me to leave this legal career?
Yes, 2020 was a hard year for me, a very difficult year. And I wouldn't say that 2020 was the year when everything happened. I think 2020 was the culmination point. Even though I had been, quote, quite successful in my career, I had advanced a lot of policy wins, or achieved things for clients that were quite meaningful. I was exhausted, or I had worked 12 to 14-hour days for 4 years, if not more. I had really given my all to the work, the thinking, to honing skills. I had been, what I tell people is that I was a dutiful friend and daughter. So I was there when people and my family needed me, but I wasn't there for the joyous times. I was just there for the times where it called for demand and need. I would show up in those times. And so, along with other factors, at the point when 2020 hit, I was already exhausted. And then came this thing called COVID, and I was isolated in terms of working. I was now working way more hours than 14 hours because the epicenter for problem solving was Congress and the agencies due to the pandemic. And so that is the work that I focused on. And so my client roster went from, in some cases, sometimes to be honest, it almost doubled what I had before. And all of the demands were high stakes. So one client would say, we are this global entity. If we do not have a solve within 2 weeks, we will have to lay off 80% of our workforce. Or to say that, we work in the childcare sector. And if we are not open, or if, once we get out of the pandemic, we may not be here. And so these weren't just easy problems. These were high stakes problems. And then on top of that, there was the racial justice movement that was being televised due to the racial injustices that were happening. And I had taken on some of the roles internally at the firm to make sure that the values we were espousing were the values we were reflecting, or we actually embraced those values internally. And so there was a lot that was going on where I was working externally. I was pretty much in survival mode. And so I had a severe breakdown. I actually didn't know how bad my breakdown was until I started my healing journey. And so what I felt could save my life was just to resign. And so I randomly in September, on a September day, turned in my resignation. And the global chairman said, "You're not quitting." He's like, "You deserve to rest." And so he gave me the opportunity to stay at the firm, but still take a sabbatical and rest. And it was the first time in my life that I believed that I was allowed to rest. And so I took that sabbatical from October 2020 to April 2021, returned back to the firm for 6 months, and then decided to close the chapter with the firm in November 2021.
One, thank you for sharing, being open to share how bad it got at that time, because I think people oftentimes need to hear about that. It's one of the things about the show. It is a space, a safe space to have this open dialogue, because some of us do work so hard as it relates to the things we do day to day. So appreciate you mentioning that. And also shout out to your boss for giving you that sabbatical at that time, because that's often rare that you hear about those things. I probably maybe heard it once or twice throughout throughout the seasons. And so that's really cool to hear that there are some leaders who have that humanity to be like, look, take a break and then decide. And it gave you
Yeah.
that space.
Can I add one thing to what you
Absolutely.
just said? The
Yeah.
global chairman, I mean, he's thinking about the firm globally. The firm has about 12, 13 offices globally. It has thousands of people working for it. And he could see the change in me. I was not sleeping well. I was always exhausted. I was second guessing myself all the time. I was showing up kind of partially paying attention, or I would give my all to everything. But if people ask, how are you doing outside of that, outside of work, I had no narrative for it. So I think there were people who could see the signs before I could see the signs of that. And I'm grateful that he understood that it may not be that I need to quit. I just may need to take the time off. And so I was really grateful for him having that perspective. So you're right.
That's when we talk about leadership, like that's leadership, to be honest. So that's awesome to hear. What fears or doubts did you have about once it was time for you to actually step away? What fears or doubts did you have about stepping away from this traditional, to be honest, prestigious path?
Yeah. Stepping away the first time for a short period of time, there weren't really any fears or doubts. I think I was relieved. When I decided to resign, officially resign in November 2021, what was interesting for me was because I had taken that break, I think I had reconnected a little bit more to a healthier side of Dana who understood here are some new norms that I need to live. What I found was interesting that is when I just resigned and people found out that what I was going to do was take a year off and focus on rest. So for all of 2022, that was my only plan to focus on rest. How I did it, I had no idea. But that was the plan. People were like, "Where are you going? What firm are you going to?" I'm like, "I'm going to my couch." Most people, about 90% of the people who would respond with some kind of theme of, "You're really courageous." And I thought it was really interesting that that was kind of the theme that just emerged, that there was courage in taking time off for myself. And so for me, I don't know if I had the fear because of my situation, but what I do realize is that a lot of people actually see or have fear and doing that step for themselves based on how people responded to me.
Absolutely agree. And when you think about this leap, how then, practically, how did you prepare financially, emotionally, logistically for this big jump?
So I have immigrant parents, and my immigrant parents were always like, save your money, save your money, save your money. And I think one of the reasons why my parents did that is because they had to break generational cycles and curses. And so for them, they needed to make sure they had stability. I think for me, in addition to stability, what saving did for me or my mindset to saving is I need to not just live for today, but I have to have peace of mind to the extent I can about how I live generally. I'm not in control of everything that will happen to me, but how I live generally. So by having that mindset of how do I build peace of mind for when things happen and I need to have that peace of mind, I already had savings for that. And I was able to do that. In terms of the mental mindset, I think I could make the decision that I needed to take a year off because I had taken 6 months off. And I had realized that that was such a short period of time for what I was going through. And I really needed the time to heal because what I was experiencing, the emotional pain, the physical pain, the emotional numbness actually that I felt, it had been building for so long, for so many years that I actually needed some space to kind of self-excavate and then understand who I was as a person. So I think I was just emotionally prepared from the first sabbatical, but I had also saved, not intentionally for the sabbatical, but I have always had a life practice of saving.
By the way, I think I'm going to take that self-excavate. That's a good one. That's a really good one. Okay. Um, let's move into some of the work that you're doing currently. You talk. I've seen you often talk a lot about designing a life where you can thrive. And so now you've had this year of rest, a lot of thinking that's going on during that time. What does thriving actually look like in practice?
Yes, good question. So when I was taking my year of rest from January until April, I was emotionally numb, but I could physically feel pain and I was feeling everything that my body was holding on to because the body keeps score. What they don't tell you is how it goes in is different from how it comes out. It comes out in ways you don't know. So my back had locked. I was exhausted. I would sleep 14-hour days. Sometimes my jaw was so tight from clenching. It was unbelievable. And so from January to April, I could not I could not name my feelings. I felt heaviness, but I couldn't name what that heaviness was. And then in April, the last Tuesday in April, I had participated in this poetry session with a famous poet that I just highly respect, Patricia Smith. And there were 30 of us with Patricia Smith, and she let each of us ask a question that she would answer, which is a patient woman. So by the time she got to me, everything she said was resonating and tears were coming down my eyes without me realizing it. It's the first time I had cried from January to April. And by the time she got to me, I was a blubbering fool. I was like, I was like ugly crying. It did not look great. People were like, we love you, even though they didn't know me, smiley emojis, all of that. And then I went to bed at 11 o'clock that evening and woke up at 3:15 the next, or 11 o'clock that night and woke up 3:15 the next day PM. And it was the first time I could name my feeling. And some of the feelings I had were anger, frustration, disappointment. And what I realized was that while I was angry and disappointed and frustrated at other people, I was angrier and more frustrated and more disappointed at myself. And once I could start naming my feelings, I could actually start naming my role and my own suffering and take accountability for it. And so what I realized once I had had met that point was that there were two things. Well, three things actually. One, I was angry and disappointed and frustrated because I was not climbing my own mountain, which made me realize that success is about accomplishing things that don't require you to be attached to your inherent value. So I can succeed. And people will give me accolades anyways. But how I show up, if I show up in my inherent value, people don't care. But thriving is different. Thriving requires you to show up in your inherent value and to own that. And so I only believe that once I am owning my inherent value, that's how I know I'm climbing my own mountain. Otherwise, I'm just succeeding and I'm not mountaineering for that.
You work with a lot of clients, I'd imagine now, and you talk with a lot of folks in this space. You maybe share a story or two about maybe either them or your own journey where resilience and clarity created a breakthrough? Because that last piece you mentioned sounds almost like it's like light at the end of the tunnel, like you're there and you see what's next. And so I'd just love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, what I talked about with Patricia Smith is one of those breakthrough moments,
Hmm.
very much so. But what I would say is what I work with clients on in terms of what you talk about clarity is that I have this definition of rest. And my definition of rest is not your traditional definition, is not what we adopt widely as self care. It's actually long form, a liberating form of self acceptance, consciously navigate the world in your agency and belonging. That's a mouthful. I know. Short form of the definition is rest means being deeply connected to your agency. So, what does that mean? It means you can't rest if you're not at rest. So, if you get a massage and you are constantly second guessing yourself, you will be tense by Monday. If you are meditating in the morning, but you're disconnected from your agency where you're second guessing yourself all the time, you're going to do that throughout the rest of the day. You're not going to be conscious of yourself. And so what I work with clients on is how do they show up with a strong sense of self where they're connected to their agency? Because being connected to your agency is what protects your inherent value. And so for clients that shows up in small ways, such as eliminating the myth of imposter syndrome and embracing widely who you are, which is a liberating form of self-acceptance, to bigger things where clients have accomplished presentations or they've started new projects or they've changed how they decide to hold space for themselves at home. Or some people have started created endeavors again going back to painting or writing a novel or things like that. Those are things that I would say are like breakthrough moments for clients.
Yeah. And when you think about not only these breakthrough for clients, but also maybe even yourself as well, this role of identity, right? And navigating transitions, especially career transitions. So what role does identity play in these types of things? And it could be a variety of things, but woman, black woman, first gen professional, lawyer, etc. What
Yeah.
role does identity play in all these?
Identity, I mean, that is a whole another podcast
That's a whole
conversation,
show.
a whole show. But I would say I'll focus on identity maybe first internally and then go externally. I
Okay.
think internally, as it relates to identity, at least for me as a Black woman, and also as the daughter of immigrants, a first generation or a second generation American, firstborn here. One is that there's so many narratives that condition us to ignore who we truly are. And they're narratives that we widely adopt because that's how we're meant to, quote, survive. So, a narrative that I'm talking about, a lot of Black women hold the narrative that we're magical, a Black girl magic. And while I love the idea of it and the intention of it, for some people, because they say they're magical, they ignore the pain they're feeling. They push through what they need to push through. And I think that holding that kind of identity with that narrative actually disconnects us from ourselves. Another way is survival mode. For a lot of people, including me, especially immigrants, I know it's other people, but I came from an immigrant family, so I'm going to talk from my experience. Survival mode is the pathway to success, not sustainability. But yet, survival mode, after a while, cannot sustain you. And so you become disconnected from your agency. So I think there are some internal ways where our identity, while they can empower us because they should, but there are times where our identity, when we hold it in a way that actually disconnects us from ourselves. Externally, I think our identity can be used in ways that force us to disconnect from ourselves. And I think that's obvious in political climate we are in right now. But, there are also times where people see at work where there are opportunities to be the Black woman who talks about an issue or to serve on this committee. But sometimes people have to be consciously aware of the Black tax. Are you doing all of this work without being properly compensated or recognized for it? Two, sometimes it's tokenism that people are willing to spend because it's more of a marketing thing than a value. And then the last thing I would say is that some people, not all, but there are some people out there who view me being a Black woman as a threat to what they are doing. And so what has happened for me in my past is that I spend a good amount of my day trying to defend who I am or protect who I am. And I have to put on armor that I shouldn't have to put on in order to quote succeed. So I do think identity plays a lot of roles. And while I haven't talked about it, and that identity can be very empowering, that at the same time, there are ways that we unintentionally can disconnect from our own agency. And there are other ways that we often talk about that also disconnect us from our own agency.
Agree. And that in and of itself can be very exhausting,
Yes.
right? That
Yes.
that's that is a whole different episode. But
Yes.
yes, absolutely.
Yes, for sure.
Now, would love to move into some of the work you're doing now. And one of the word, obviously, you had the Thrive Architects, right? But you use this word architecture in obviously the Thrive Architects. And so, why that metaphor, and how does it help people think about building their next chapter?
Yes. So great question. I think for me, the reason why I went with Thrive Architects, clearly we now know why Thrive. But architects is because when I was young, going back to my fascination with voice, I would always have this mantra that I wanted to be the voice for others. And then maybe about three years prior to the pandemic, it changed. I realized I didn't want to be the voice for other people. I wanted to build platforms for people to have their own voices or that not have their own voices, but knowing how to use their voices in the way that they choose to use their voices. And so for me, Thrive Architects is that I help build platforms for people to have the space to choose how they want to use their voices, both in policy. So the advocacy world, because a lot of community members have the greatest experiences, which makes them the best experts on issues, but yet they are more so their stories are used or more so as props rather than them being collaborators in the policy work. So that's where I'm trying to build platforms. Organizational health wise, there are leaders. We need people, good quality leaders at organizations to help with advocacy or to help just with the whole workplace ecosystem. And so they need platforms and spaces to do things differently. And then the other platform is on well being. We as individuals need to learn how to sustain ourselves, and we need the platform to self advocate and work within our agency in order to create the sustainable models we need for ourselves.
I love that connection and truly the imagery behind all of it. You're also a part of the podcast tribe, right? And so that's and that's I'm clearly a fan, okay, of the podcast space. You host a show called The Rest of Us, right? And it reframes, as I mentioned earlier to the audience, reframes rest as self-liberation, especially for people who are giving so much of themselves to work and to others, which we've talked about throughout. How does this idea of rest connect to not only your own journey of leaving law and the work you do, but also now the things that are happening at the Thrive?
Yes. So, one, the fact that I created Thrive Architects is a showing of rest in and of itself. I never thought I would be an entrepreneur in that way. It was not on my bingo card, but yet here we are. So one, I think in terms of rest, being connected to my agency, starting Thrive in and of itself has been amazing. And then I think in terms of how rest just focuses on my work, I'll get down to kind of the advocacy and people showing up with a strong sense of self. So I do a lot as it relates to the work I do with strategic policy advising. I focus on social justice and social impact work there. And what I think is important is one of the problems I think we have in this country, not to get political, but we have in this country is not the quote bad actors who want to oppress or see things a certain way that solely advantage them but undermine the rest of humanity. What concerns me more are people who are very much afraid to show up with a strong sense of self in a way for others because they cannot even do it for themselves. And so, one of the reasons why I created the podcast, why I created Thrive, and why the undercurrent of a lot of this is rest as being deeply connected to your agency is because we as a collective cannot uphold humanity if we're even afraid to live in our own humanity. And so that's kind of like a theme, an undercurrent to all the work I'm doing, the rest work that I'm doing, because rest for me is both a mindset and a cultivated space. And I think we only think about rest as a cultivated space, but this mindset piece is key and pivotal, I think, to progressing humanity.
The following segment contains a discussion of suicidal ideation and mental health. If this topic is difficult for you, please take care while listening. I'm curious, if you hadn't left, who do you think you would have become? And would you recognize that version of yourself today?
Honestly, Brian, if I hadn't left, I don't know if I would have been alive or well. I was, um, I was, it was the darkest place of my life. I've never been there before. I remember the managing partner of the firm calling me one day just to check in as a human being because I had been doing a lot of work for the firm. And he's this white man who is a very kind man. And, I think he's just doing his check in. And timing wise, it just so happened to be him. He's like, "How are you doing?" And I'm told often as a Black woman, don't show weakness at work, all of that. And I just start crying. I am like, and I kept saying, I do not know where my voice is. I have lost my voice because it was the first time in my life where I was not connected to my voice. I could be the voice for all these other clients. I could advocate. I could teach people how to have their own voices, but I did not have my voice. And so that was a very dark place to be. And also with my healing journey, I only realized after the fact just how dark of a place I was. To be honest and fair to your listeners, that this could be a trigger warning. So I'm just going to pause for a little bit or stall for a little bit for those who may want to lower the volume. And then you can raise it back in like 10 seconds or so. But I had suicidal ideation. I didn't know it at the time, but I knew it as I was healing. That's what it was, and that's what it's called, and that those were the signs of it. So either I would have been very unwell, or I don't know if I would have been here, to be honest.
I appreciate the transparency there. Throughout the show, we have had very open dialogue about those types of issues, and it's real. It's human, and I often, one of the taglines of the show is about real stories, real people. This is real life. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And for those who are listening, maybe for the first time, when we do talk about these issues and we talk about mental health and the importance of that throughout the seasons, we've had conversations here, but specifically in season 2, I dedicated 2 months of content to mental health professionals specifically. And so for those who may be listening for the first time, I'd encourage you to definitely revisit some of the episodes in season 2 where we talk with some therapists, some counselors about things like this, because the grief around everything that happened during the pandemic, yes, but the grief around losing a job, the grief and the pain at times that people go through while they're working, these are things we often don't talk about enough, but there are always professionals out there to help people. So Dana, I appreciate you sharing that. And I just wanted to just make that quick note for the listeners today. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to go back now to you had the meeting. I think it was Patricia Smith, you said was the
Yes,
poet?
yes,
Patricia Smith.
yes.
And so I've heard you talk about, poetry as a constant through your journey, practicing law, building new communities, all these things. So how has poetry, maybe that class or afterwards, how has poetry really helped you stay grounded in who you are as a human being, even as your professional identity and communities have shifted?
Yes, great question. So I actually didn't really settle into poetry until my first sabbatical from October 2020 through April 2021. And I was just writing and journaling, and things were coming out, but I wasn't settling into any kind of practice. It didn't feel right. And one day I was like, why don't I just give myself to be creative and free with what I write and wrote? And that took the form of poetry, and it hasn't left me since. I call writing poetry my liberating form of rest because it is a way for me to deeply connect to who I am and also be enlivened by my details. I don't depend on anyone else to do that for me. That's why I call it a liberating form of rest. And so I now write poetry. And Brian, who knew? I am actually published, which
Oh, that's awesome.
I was not ever intending, nor do I write to get published. But when I got my first acceptance, I was like, wait, so this is going to be out in the world. So for me, the reason why I love poetry is one, I have my own space to be in my own world and to be free in it. I may edit the words and work once it's on the page, but I don't edit my thoughts. I let my thoughts be. And it's a way for me to become keenly aware of who I am. There's a deep mind body connection that happens when I write poetry. The other thing that I love about poetry is that I've been able to build an amazing community. So there's a writing circle of Black writers that my poetry auntie that I love so much, Ellen, put together. And then I also have another poetry circle, Margaret's Daughters, that has Sullivan and Benin and Rosa in it. And we are a community. And then every other Monday, I have poetry time with my friend Razia, who is on the West Coast, and that's our intimacy time together. And what I love about poetry too in the poetry community is that because we write honestly, you're connected with people differently. There is this bond and openness and trust that you have. And I think that kind of community that I have, in addition to my world of advocacy or doing leadership development or other things like that, it helps really to ground me and keep me centered in who I am as well. So poetry is my liberating activity. It's not going anywhere. I love it dearly. And it also just keeps me grounded in myself.
I love that. When you take a look back now, this whole process up to this point, what have you learned most about yourself?
I think what I've learned most about myself throughout this entire process is that when I climb my own mountain, two things happen. The universe conspires for my good. The universe is always conspiring for my good. Sometimes the universe is trying to push me out a window because I won't go through the door. And sometimes I'm resisting, right? It's still conspiring for my good, but I'm like, why are you fighting me on this? Right. And the universe is like, you're not supposed to be here. But when I'm climbing my own mountain, the opportunities come and they are very clear. And that is one thing that I now fundamentally believe. I'm a spiritual person, and I used to say it a lot. Now I fundamentally embrace that. And I love it. The second thing I would say is I have this mantra about myself, and I share it with all my friends all the time. Is the mantra is let the world catch up. Sometimes you are doing things that people will not understand. People do not understand your perspective or point of view. And sometimes you stop because you're waiting for that validation of understanding when in fact you're supposed to keep going because you're maybe the model for it, or maybe you're entering new territory and now you're inviting people to come along, or maybe people feel what you're feeling, but they don't have the words and you can present them with the words of what to do. So often I tell myself when I know I feel that strong sense, that liberating sense, that agency sense that I'm on the right path, I'm like, well, we're going to have to let the world catch up and keep doing it anyway. And then the last thing that I think I realized about myself is that life is way more simple than we make it. And I don't make as much money as I made at the firm. I still work a lot because I started my own business, but I am much happier. My life is way more simple and I just love it. And that simplicity, I will embrace day in and day out.
I love that, and that we don't have enough time. That resonates. That second one especially resonates with me so much. All of what you said, but I just couldn't help it but thinking about letting people catch up. That really touches me. That really does. So I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, that's a gem in and of itself, but I do have to ask you some advice for the audience, right? And so for someone who is looking to make this big career transition or life transition, being in a prestigious type of role or maybe even industry, what's the first step that they should take if they're contemplating this move?
Yeah, I would say, I think the first step is to pause and pause, give yourself the space to listen to yourself until you can believe what yourself is honestly trying to tell you. I think there are a lot of people that say, for example, I can't leave because the unknown. But what yourself is telling you, the honest thing that yourself is telling you is you can't stay and that you're feeling safe in being stuck. But I am telling you, you cannot stay. And so I think because when you are in survival mode or when your body is in fight, flight, freeze, fawn, when you are at high stress levels, uh, your mind views everything as a threat. And so your mind tries to put you in safety mode even when things aren't safe. Your mind keeps you where it's familiar. And so sometimes you have to pause and question what is the undercurrent through all of these things that I'm thinking that I'm telling myself. I know what I'm telling myself is not true, but what am I afraid to admit to myself that is the truth? And I think you have to start learning how to believe that. And what belief may look like may be writing out the truth and exploring it. Why am I afraid of this truth, right? But if you have to center yourself on the truth. My truth was I could not survive the way I was at the firm. I just could not. And so I needed to change, but I was afraid of what that change could look like until someone told me just rest as well. So I would say it's not a very practical one. It's not one to say, hey, take the step and go to maybe this office and ask for that. And I think hopefully other guests have helped people think about that. Mine is to pause and listen to your honest self and start believing it.
And when you think about this distinction, right, how can people distinguish between discomfort that signals growth versus discomfort that signals it's time to go?
Yes, I think that goes back to my when whenever you feel the urge to do something different and you keep doing the same thing, that means that it's time to go. Whenever you feel the urge to do something and you realize that, oh my gosh, I did this thing and I'm learning and it's different and it's making me fulfilled, I think that is still growth. That is just uncomfortable. But when you are just stuck and after 5 years, you are still stuck, my friend, it's time to go. And I know it seems obvious, but it's not when you're in it. And so sometimes you have to say the obvious thing out loud. I'm stuck and I need to unstick or unstuck myself in order to do something different.
Looking forward, what are some of the things that you're most excited about for the future, whether personally or professionally?
So I would say, what am I excited about? Honestly, again, probably not practical, but goes back to the simplicity of life that I just love and adore and embrace. Doesn't mean, y'all, I'm not working a lot, or because I am working right now. October, we're talking in October, but it's overwhelming for me right now in terms of the blessings that are coming. I'll put it that way. But what I will say is what I'm looking forward to is still being enlivened by my own self. Like I'm very happy and joyous with who I am. And I also trust myself a lot so that I am very much primed that when things happen in life, the unexpected, a lot of times it doesn't take me under like it did before because it felt so overwhelming. I may not like it, but I trust that I can figure it out. And I think there's simplicity in that. So what I'm looking for in the future is just continuing to live a life where I feel enlivened by myself and living a life where I am climbing my own mountain. And wherever that takes me is where I'm meant to be.
Now, flipping the mic, what's one question you have for me that I can hopefully answer?
I'm sure you can answer it. I think one question I have for you is where in your life right now do you feel like you're climbing your own mountain?
So I think I'm climbing my own mountain, truthfully, with this show. I have a lot of creative energy that I can't really get out at times in my day to day work. And I love what I do day to day. But I think I'm climbing my own mountain in this space. And I'm also, the time we're recording this, and truthfully, by the time this is released, more information will be out about. I created this offering recently called Storyline, where I'm helping people better tell their stories. Because what I've found is that over the course of these past few years, as I've been building my own professional brand, you never take, well, at least me, I didn't take a step back to be like, oh, well, what do other people feel about this, right? Because I'm so focused on doing what I need to do for this vision I have. But I kept getting more and more questions around how do I balance what I do with healthcare and the show and this? And probably took me too long to figure out a way to try and help. But I finally decided to try and help. And so I've created this offering. We're just helping folks better tell their story, but authentically, right? Because there's a lot of BS online. But I think there are so many people who are doing so many great things, whether it's within an organization or their own company that they're building, or maybe a project or initiative that they're working on. And they just at times need help telling that story. And because I'm in the storytelling business, I was like, why not try to help out? And so I think I'm climbing my own mountain in that space because it's a new space for me. I'm having a lot of fun doing it. Did a pilot over the summer. And now it's just about how can I continue to help in a way and put it out there in ways that really supports people in whatever those goals are. Like I'm not telling you what to do. Like in some ways I am, but I want to know what is it that you actually want to do. What are the stories you want to tell? What's the narrative that you have about yourself that people need to know more about? Because I can't tell that for you, but you need to tell me what that is. And then what I can do is help you get that narrative out there. How do we build on that? And so that's the mountain. I guess that's the next mountain, as if I need any more, but that's the
It's still your
next mountain.
mountain. Yes.
I'm building my mountains, right?
Yes.
But that's
I
the
love that.
next
I love
thing.
that so much.
Yeah. And so that's been a lot of fun just to see what people do. And now what I do is like I watch people online now get all their stuff out there. And I'm just so proud. I'm just like, look at you. And of course I'm engaging and all that stuff. But that's the next mountain for me is the storyline piece and obviously continuing to grow the show as well. Because like the things that you've shared, I've had a few attorneys who have come on here. Not a lot though, but somebody's going to resonate with that. And the feedback that I get from guests that come on the show, from people who listen, you just never know, Dana. One person, this conversation could have a positive impact on one person. And guess what? We've done our job.
Yes, we
We've
have.
done our job. So, but yeah, that's a great, great question. I don't get stumped often, but that was a good one now that I was
Well,
done
you
thinking
gave a
about it.
great answer. You answered it, which I knew you would.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say thank you for joining today. I hope we can stay connected and I love the work that you're doing and would love for you to share with our listeners where they can find you and support some of the work that you're doing.
Yes. So, first and foremost, I'd love people to join the Rest of Us community and listen to the podcast. By the time this comes out, we will have a website. The restofuspodcast.com will be the website where we're going to be community building all throughout 2026. So that is one platform I would love for people to join. And then also, I will be starting, and by the time this comes out, it will be a Substack page, The Rest of Us, where we'll have the show that people can listen to. But really, what I'm trying to do is build community. So it'll be afterthoughts, things that I've explored or interactions that I've had with people that I want to just tease out a little bit more through a quote newsletter, but it's really just to send to people tidbits of thoughts that they can capture and hold. So that is how people can stay connected. And then lastly, I'm the founder and principal of Thrive Architects, and the website there is thethrivearch.com, where I do advocacy work, organizational health, and of course, well-being.
Well, thank you for that info. And look, that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank Dana Weeks for joining me today. I'll share all of her information in our show notes. And I hope you all got a lot out of this, picked up some great nuggets. And most importantly, I hope you all have a great week. And we'll definitely see you next time. Dana, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Why I Left. Join us next time for more inspiring stories about growth, resilience, and transformation. Visit us online at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co.